Right. Let's start with something quite shocking. Imagine fighting for, well, the most basic democratic right, the right to vote. And the government's response, their strategy against you, is just calculated cruelty. We're talking about the suffragettes, of course, but specifically this brutal practice known as force feeding.
Yeah, it's visceral, isn't it?
It really is. I mean,
Yeah.
picture this. Women, they've chosen starvation as a political protest,
Yeah.
right, inside prison, and they're physically held down. Authorities push a tube down their nose or throat. It often caused bleeding, vomiting, I mean permanent damage sometimes, all just to stop them dying in custody and becoming martyrs. The sources we looked at, they don't pull any punches. They talk about hospital wings basically being turned into torture chambers.
Exactly. And that's not just, physical violence for its own sake. It was the state actively trying to break their political will, their spirit.
Right.
And that image, that shocking reality, it sets the stage perfectly for our deep dive today. Because that level of suffering, that was the price they were willing to pay just to demand a voice.
Right.
We're focusing on the life of Emmeline Pankhurst, an incredible figure. She wasn't just sort of participating in politics. For her, every word, every action, it was almost like an act of war. A war against a system built, really, to keep half the population invisible. She took this intense fury she felt and channeled it, quite strategically, into political fuel.
Okay, so let's unpack that. This blueprint for, well, radical change. And try to understand why her story really is about this ferocious persistence. Our mission here is to trace how Emmeline Pankhurst managed to ignite this fire for women's rights, a fire that ultimately just refused to die out.
Yeah, and to feel that intensity, you really need to understand the world she was born into. It was pretty dark for women.
So, setting the scene, she was born in 1858. Manchester, England. Now, Manchester was this global city, wasn't it? A hub of industry, progress.
Oh, absolutely. The engine of the Industrial Revolution in many ways. But, and this is the key thing, legally and socially, women were just shadows.
Yeah.
Genuinely second-class citizens, even in this supposedly modern society.
So what did that actually mean day to day? What rights did they not have?
Well, the lack of the vote is the obvious one, right? But it went so much deeper. The legal situation was almost medieval, honestly. Such a stark contrast to all the industrial progress happening. Once a woman married, she generally couldn't own property in her own name. And for working women, this was crucial. Often, the law said she couldn't even keep the wages she earned.
Seriously?
Yeah.
For own wages?
Yeah. They belonged to her husband. The whole system was just structurally designed to make sure women had zero economic or political leverage, none. And for Emmeline, this wasn't just like an abstract idea of injustice. She saw it as a living creature, something woven into the very fabric of society. Her political awareness started early. Her parents were quite politically active. And then it was really cemented by her marriage to Richard Pankhurst. He was a radical barrister, known for supporting women's rights, especially property rights. And they worked together for years, within the system, advocating change, reasoned debate, the polite way.
But the sources point to a real shift, don't they? A kind of breaking point. When Richard died in 1898, that personal grief, it wasn't just sadness. It seems like it forged something harder. Political steel, maybe?
I think that's a good way to put it. She seems to have realized that the laws felt like stone, immovable. She spent decades trying the polite route, whispering petitions to a parliament that just wasn't listening. And she decided, quite firmly it seems, that whispering was over.
And that decision led directly to 1903, right? The big moment. Founding the Women's Social and Political Union, the WSPU. And that slogan, that mantra, deeds, not words. That says it all, doesn't it?
It really does. This wasn't just another society or committee. It was intended as a revolution from the start. They consciously abandoned those polite drawing room petitions and aimed straight for public disruption, confrontation.
They called it a revolution in corsets, which I love. Captures that clash of respectability and radical action.
Exactly. These were often middle-class, respectable women deliberately rejecting that ladylike behavior. And the methods they used were specifically designed to disrupt things, to make noise. We're talking chaining themselves to the railings outside Parliament, shouting down ministers at political meetings. And yes, it escalated. Smashing windows, setting fire to post boxes. Property damage became part of the strategy.
Okay, but those tactics, I mean, they must have been controversial. The sources talk about this a lot, right? Did these acts actually help change minds? Or did they just, alienate people? Confirm those stereotypes about women being too hysterical for politics?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's exactly the friction they were aiming for. The sources show they knew they were alienating some people. That wasn't really the point. Their goal wasn't persuasion through charm, necessarily. It was about creating leverage. Leverage born out of sheer desperation, you could argue. They wanted to make themselves unavoidable, unignorable.
Right, to force the issue.
Precisely, to make the political establishment deeply uncomfortable. The core message underpinning it all was, how can you call yourself a democracy when half your citizens have no voice? They were essentially trading public approval, in some quarters, for political visibility, making a huge amount of noise.
And they definitely got that visibility, which led straight to arrests, lots of them. Prison became, as the sources put it, a kind of second home for Emmeline and many of her followers.
That's right, Holloway Prison especially. But they were smart. They understood the fight didn't stop just because you were locked up, and that led to the ultimate act of defiance inside, the hunger strikes.
A truly desperate measure.
Desperate, yes, but also incredibly powerful politically. Their bodies were getting weaker, obviously, but the political message got stronger and clearer. They were refusing to disappear, refusing to be broken, even if it cost them their health. They turned their own suffering into a weapon.
Which loops us back to where we started the force feeding. The government wasn't doing that out of concern for their health, were they? It was purely strategic.
Oh, completely. They were terrified of creating martyrs. Imagine the political fallout if a prominent suffragette died in prison from starvation. So they tried to use this medical procedure, this force feeding, to neutralize that threat, to keep them alive, but broken.
But did it work? Or did it backfire?
Well, this is where the suffragettes' strategic brilliance, or maybe their sheer nerve, really comes through. The media, much of the public, yes, they called them mad, extremists, hysterical. But the suffragettes managed to use the brutality of the force feeding itself as a kind of counter-propaganda. Every time a story came out about a woman being violently force-fed, it generated outrage. It highlighted the state's desperation. They'd rather torture women than give them the vote. That was the narrative they pushed.
So the government's attempt to control the situation actually fueled the fire.
In many ways, yes. It got so bad the government introduced something called the Cat and Mouse Act. Officially, the Prisoners, Temporary Discharge for Ill Health Act, they'd release women who were near death from starvation or force feeding, let them recover slightly.
And then rearrest them, like a cat playing with a mouse.
Exactly. It was cynical, but it showed the women had forced the government's hand. They turned their own bodies into the battleground, the negotiating table.
The sheer intensity of that period, the violence, the sacrifice, it makes the next turn quite surprising. World War I breaks out in 1914, and Emmeline Pankhurst, who'd been fighting the government tooth and nail...
There's a complete 180.
Right. She aligns with the establishment, calls off all militant protests, and urges women, WSPU members, everyone, to throw themselves into the war effort. Factories, transport, nursing...
It was hugely controversial. You have to remember, many suffragettes came from socialist or pacifist backgrounds. They saw this as a betrayal, accused her of abandoning the cause for, nationalist fervor.
So what was her thinking? Why the sudden shift?
The sources suggest it was a pragmatic, if high-stakes gamble, a political calculation. Her argument was basically, if women prove their absolute indispensability, their loyalty, their capability during this national crisis, then how could the government possibly deny them equality afterwards? What moral ground would they have left? She was trying to earn the vote, essentially, not through disruption anymore, but through demonstrated contribution and sacrifice on a national scale.
A different kind of deed, perhaps.
Perhaps. A very different kind, yes. And it seems the wager, well, it partially paid off.
Because after the war, in 1918, Parliament passes the Representation of the People Act.
Yes, a massive breakthrough. But, and we need to be really clear about the details here, this act gave the vote to women, yes, but only those over the age of 30. And crucially, only those who met certain property qualifications or university graduates.
Ah, so not quite equal suffrage yet.
Not at all. There wasn't universal suffrage by any means. It was a calculated compromise by the government. It essentially rewarded the middle-class women, the property owners, the ones who had visibly contributed to the war effort in those specific ways, while deliberately excluding many younger women, poorer women, working-class women, the ones seen as perhaps more radical or destabilizing. It was definitely a half-open door, but a hugely important door nonetheless, a foot in.
And the sources also make it clear, don't they, that these big movements, these revolutions, they're never neat and tidy. There's immense personal cost. The movement wasn't always unified. And for Emmeline, this involved a really painful split within her own family.
That's right, absolutely heartbreaking reading about it. Her daughters, Sylvia and Adela, they broke away completely. Deep ideological differences. Sylvia, especially, became a fierce critic. She accused her mother and the WSPU of becoming too focused on, well, middle-class objectives and militant tactics, and argued they were neglecting the specific needs and struggles of working-class women. And she had a point, you know.
So that raises a critical perspective, doesn't it? Looking back at the WSPU, was its structure, its focus, maybe inherently biased towards middle-class goals?
It's a necessary question to ask. The history is messy. It's human. There are valid criticisms. Emmeline Pankhurst endured imprisonment, force-feeding, public ridicule, and also the complete fracture of her own family for this cause. Acknowledging those complexities, the class dynamics, the controversial wartime nationalism, it doesn't diminish her impact, but it makes her story real, tangible, not just a plaster saint. She risked everything she had, literally everything, including her children's loyalty, for that single driving objective.
And she didn't quite live to see the final victory, did she?
No, tragically. She passed away in 1928, just a few weeks, literally weeks, before the Equal Franchise Act finally passed. That was the act that granted women the vote on the same terms as men age 21, no property qualification needed, full equal suffrage. So she didn't see the finish line. But her relentless persistence had fundamentally changed the landscape, made the impossible seem possible, made the invisible, as you said earlier, unstoppable.
So, reflecting on all this, what's the takeaway for us, for you listening today? Her story, it's more than just history, isn't it? It feels like a kind of manual for demanding change. It's a stark reminder that every right you exercise, voting, owning property, keeping your own income, these things weren't just given. They were fought for fiercely by people who were told again and again, just sit down, be quiet, know your place.
Absolutely. Her legacy is really a lesson in leverage and audacity and courage. It's not saying you have to lead some huge national revolution, but it is about refusing to accept the comfort or the ease of silence when you see injustice. Emmeline Pankhurst showed that when institutions build walls, sometimes the only way through is sheer, breathtaking audacity. And that even when individual voices feel like they're trembling, together, they can absolutely shake empires.
A powerful thought.
And maybe the final question, the one we pull from these sources for you to think about, is this. What injustice today makes your heart burn? What makes you angry? And thinking about Pankhurst's example, what tangible risk might you be willing to take, however small, to help change it? Because that fire, that refusal to accept the status quo, that's the real living legacy of Emmeline Pankhurst. It's alive in every single person who looks at the world and says, no, this isn't right, it must and it will be better.